everyone. This is Milika Ormiston, and I'm joined today with Alyssa Westring, who will be speaking about parenting, about how to harness the science of leadership to thrive in all aspects of your life, and how to, as parents, lead more purposeful lives, characterized by harmony, connection, and impact. Parenting can be challenging under any circumstances, and I'm sure that many of us who are parents have lately found ourselves in a demanding situation, juggling many responsibilities. Thank you so much for joining us today, Alyssa.
Thank you for having me, and I'm happy to be here and speaking with everyone today. As of a few days ago, this slide was really about parenting in the pandemic, and I just wanted to acknowledge that parenting in 2020 and the challenges that we're all facing are much broader than just the pandemic. I'm here in Chicago, and I know that we're all also working on parenting through the current political situation and addressing racial injustice. So I just wanted to, put that out front that this isn't just about coping with the pandemic. It's really about being a leader as a parent and as an individual through all of the challenges that we're going through. And as much as I hope to offer suggestions, I just also want to start out by saying that this is really hard. This is a hard time to be a parent. It's a hard time to be an employee. It's a hard time to be a person right now, especially for some. So, hopefully these ideas and these concepts and tools that we're going to go through will make things better. But I think it's also important to just show ourselves a little bit of grace and self-acceptance if we're struggling, if things aren't perfect. I am certainly not trying to give the impression that they can or should be perfect right now. So
Th-
working, sorry.
no. I was listening to intently, and thank you so much, Alyssa. As a parent of a 13-year-old in Washington, D.C., this is certainly something I'll be listening to very intently. So thank you so much for doing
Yeah,
this.
yeah.
I'll just give some background about the information,
Mhm.
and then we can get started.
Okay,
Uh,
great.
right? So there will be questions. There will be time for questions. So please, for the listeners, for the viewers, click the Ask a Question button below the video to ask your questions throughout the webinar. And at the end, we'll have time to go over them. We also included a link to the book Parents Who Lead in the resources section of the page below the video. A little bit about Alyssa. So Alyssa Westring is an award-winning educator and the DePaul University inaugural presidential fellow. As the Director of Research for Total Leadership, Alyssa brings her expertise to evaluating the impact of the leadership on clients and program participants. Alyssa has made significant contributions to the research in the books Leading the Life You Want and Baby Bust. And in her TEDx talk, The Secret Life of a Work-Life Insider, she describes how her research questions and personal journey into motherhood have shaped one another. She's an associate professor of management and entrepreneurship and co-author, as you know, of Parent Who Lead, the leadership approach you need to parent with purpose, fuel your career, and create a richer life. And I'll take you away, Alyssa, from here.
Okay,
Thank you.
sorry about that.
No.
So yeah, as I was saying, this is a really challenging time for parents, and I've been working on this research specifically related to parenting and leadership for the last 3 years, but have really been doing much broader research on how leadership skills can enable people to be more effective across all the different parts of their life. For going on 20 years, I started studying this when I was in college, and I was very passionate about this before I even had kids. So this is a question and a topic that extends well beyond just being a parent, but really being a leader and being a person who has values and vision and lives in accordance with those. As part of this research, we asked parents what it feels like right now to be a working parent. And we asked this in pre-pandemic, pre-2020 times. But you'll see that so many of their responses are how we're feeling now, right? We're probably just amplified in terms of our feelings of being afraid, stuck, overwhelmed, distracted, confused. So this is universal to parenting, but I think particularly right now when so many of us are trying to work from home or maybe have less stable employment or less predictable employment and certainly less childcare, we're really sort of having all of these emotions probably on a daily basis, in addition, of course, to hopefully some feelings of fulfillment and fun and happiness that we get from our different roles. So just again, going back to this idea that I know that this is hard and it's perfectly normal to be feeling all of these things, and probably all at once. So I think that it's pretty safe to say that for many of us, 2020 is bringing us the leadership challenge of our lives. When we think about our role as individuals and how we influence other people, certainly as parents, we are responsible for not only getting ourselves through this pandemic and this period of um, political and racial upheaval, but also guiding our children, our coworkers, our partners, the people we care about, our family members, our aging parents. We're trying to guide and lead all those other people through this time period as well. So, if you frame the current situation as a leadership challenge, it really, at least in my opinion, helps us see how we can feel and be more proactive about how we deal with the things that are coming at us, as opposed to being reactive. It's really easy to default to the mindset of, oh, these things are happening to me, and feeling reactive and stuck. And when we frame it as a leadership challenge, we can really say, how do I step up and lead myself and others through the work of getting through this challenging time? And it's not easy, but there are fortunately things we know about leadership that can help us guide how we act and how we think during this time. So there's essential skills that we can use right now, working parents, but also not currently working parents. We realize that employment might not be stable right now. And these are drawn from the decades and decades of research on what makes effective leaders. And we know what makes effective leaders in the workplace. People have been studying it for decades. And now my research and the research I'm doing with Stu Friedman, and the research that other people are doing, is showing that those same leadership skills that we're fairly familiar with in terms of a work context, are also applicable to other parts of our lives. So I want to talk about all of those today, and I'll touch on each of them briefly. But then, of course, if there's questions about any specific ones, please, make a note and put that in the questions, and I can go back to it and talk a little bit more in depth about what I mean or how we're doing it. So the first one is clarifying your guiding values. As I said, it's really easy to be reactive and to just focus on putting out whichever fire is going on, whether it's helping your kids with school or taking care of your work or dealing with something in the house, or anything else. So um, the first step that we advocate for leadership development is really figuring out what matters most to you and why. And if you listen to any great speech from a leader, you'll know that they start with these guiding values. Another step is thinking about how you can use those leadership skills and qualities to engage with your children in meaningful ways, and engage with other people in meaningful ways too, to talk about shared values, a vision of what the world could be like when we work together, and expressing your willingness to learn from them, to understand what their experience is, and to share what matters most to you as well. To build and really cultivate proactively a community of caregiving and support, to experiment and discover new ways to live and work. So I always remind people that if it was easy to improve how we manage all the different parts of our lives, most of us would have done it already. The solutions here are not obvious. So, how can we get better at trying out and experimenting with new ways to live and work, as opposed to at least what I see many people's tendency, including my own, is to think, if I just solve this one work life puzzle, everything will be perfect, right? But it's really more about learning how to experiment, fail fast, and continuously iterate in terms of how we live our lives. So I'll talk about each of these a little bit more and show you some exercises that hopefully you can use to grow in these skills. But of course, how much growth can occur in an hour? Maybe hopefully just the start of a little bit of growth, and not necessarily get you all the way there, but hopefully it'll inspire you to work more and talk with the people you care about and try some things out. So, as I mentioned, the foundation of leadership is, well, the foundation of good leadership is knowing your values and communicating them to other people. So, there's a lot of ways to articulate your values. And most people, we sort of sit back and we say, well, I know what I care about, right? I care about my family. I care about people's safety. I care about the world. But to really push ourselves to be more specific in terms of the values that we embrace. So rather than just saying, I value family, what about family do you value? Is it having fun with your family? Is it providing comfort to your family? Is it making sure your family is financially secure, right? What are the specific values within this broad bucket of values that we say that we value? It might be things like fun or persistence or adventure or speaking out against injustice or making a difference in the world or protecting the environment, right? You can really start to articulate a set of values. And we find that when people have a set of about 4 or 5 core values that they feel strongly about, that they can articulate, here are my values, but not just here are my values, here's why those things are important to me. That's the way to connect with other people more deeply and more meaningfully. And then to start bringing in those other people to talk about values. So, what are the values that your family espouses together? What are the unique values? I think we all wish that, if, for those of us who have partners, we all wish that we had the exact same values as our partner because it might make things a little bit easier, but that's not always the case. So, what are the values that your partner brings to this? Where are the discrepancies? Where are the overlaps? What about your children? A 2-year-old might not be able to talk about values very articulately, but a teenager certainly can, right? What matters most? Try to learn and understand one another in the process of talking about these things and getting more familiar with expressing our values to other people. I think we often default to the assumption of people know what we care about, right? Just because they know us, so they know, and that doesn't really always pan out. We've worked with couples for about a year, 30 dual career couples. We worked with them very closely. And what they found was that even for the couples who had been together 20, 30 years, in many cases, they hadn't really articulated their values in such a clear way to one another before. They just assumed that the other person knew why they worked really long hours or knew why they always made time for family dinner. They never really talked about it. And many of them said, oh, well, we used to talk about this stuff before kids, but now we don't have time anymore. And what we find is that by taking the time up front to have these conversations, you can not only feel better about those relationships, but it actually ends up saving you time and energy in the long run because you understand each other better. And we'll talk more about that in a bit. Now, normally, we ask people to imagine themselves 15 years in the future and say, what would your life look like if you lived those values 15 years from now? And I don't know about you all, but 15 days from now is hard to imagine in the current situation. So I think that exercise is a little bit out of touch for us in this current moment. So think about, what would it feel like or look like if you lived your current values right now? Now, I want to acknowledge again that that doesn't mean that it's possible to live every second in perfect alignment with your core values, right? So just because you take the time to say, well, in my perfect day of pandemic quarantining, whatever, how would I start my day? What would I do next? How would I spend my time and energy? Just because I can imagine a day where I work out first thing and I cook the homemade food and then I do some uninterrupted work and then I help my kids, right? Just because I can envision that doesn't ever mean that I will have that specific day. But the idea is that it can help illuminate the disconnect or the potential for connections between what we care about and our actions. And identifying those gaps and identifying those opportunities is an important part of the process of being an effective leader. So a leader, we all have our organization's leaders right now, are probably many of you have received emails or contact during the pandemic and during these protest times from your CEO, if your company that you work for, or from a boss who says, here's our values, here's what we stand for. And then you may feel like there's this missing step, but what would it look like to live those values? Where are we living up to them? And where are we falling short? And that's uncomfortable work to do, to realize where we're falling short of living our values, but it's an important part of this process. And one way that we can do that is by doing what we call taking the four-way view. We find that for most people, it's relatively easy to think of their life in four different buckets or domains. Not necessarily the same buckets or domains for everybody, but these general ones tend to work pretty well, but you define them how you want to. So first we think of career. This is current job, job aspirations, previous job, your career network, mentoring, sort of the broad conceptualization of career, even if you're not currently employed. The second bucket is family. That includes kids, partner, but it also includes our extended family. I think many of us are thinking in new ways about how we engage with our older parents. I know that I certainly am. Next bucket is community. And this one tends to be slightly harder for people to wrap their brains around just because we don't too often think of ourselves as part of a community in modern US life. Maybe some of us do, but not all of us. So, community is your neighborhood, your religious, political, any sort of affiliations, your volunteer groups, your city, your region, however you conceive of the people who aren't just work and family. We can put that part of your life into the community bucket. And then lastly, we have the self domain, which is really your internal world, your mind, your body, your spirit, your mental health, and your physical health. And under the best of circumstances, we don't necessarily give as much attention to the different parts of our lives as we would like to. But I'm going to ask you to hopefully grab a piece of paper, jot these down, and think about how important is each of these buckets of your life to you. And we're going to ask you to divide it up among 100%. And the reason we do that is because otherwise people just write 100% for everything, right? Everything's 10 out of 10 important when you're not being forced to make some trade offs in terms of how you think about these things. So think about how important are the different parts of your life to you. And then the next one is how much of your waking attention and energy are you giving to those different parts of your life right now? So, for many of us, we may be trying to work from home while also helping our kids get their um, work and school and life taken care of. So, for instance, if we are officially on the work clock for 8 hours a day, but in actuality, most of our attention is elsewhere and we're constantly being distracted by our children or other parts of our life, it may not, the percentage of your attention that goes to your career might not actually be the same as sort of the hours you are officially working. And again, thinking about this in terms of a percentage or a proportion that adds up to 100. And then lastly, your satisfaction. How happy, how fulfilled are you in each of these different domains? And just remembering that it's okay to have low numbers here. I know when I first did this, I never wanted to sort of admit that I hadn't figured this all out. I'm like, well, I'm a work life expert, so I should be able to be 10 out of 10 across all of these. If they're low, it's okay, right? Part of leadership is revealing areas of weakness, and that's good news in some ways because it means that there's room for growth. So, invite you to think about this. This is just one tool that helps people get a better sense of where things are right now and where there might be gaps between how you spend your time and energy and your values and what matters most to you. And there's other tools too. In some of the work that I do, I work with people and we track our actions for sometimes up to a week in 30-minute increments to get a more objective sense of how we're currently spending our time and energy. And that's not just, oh, I'm at work or I'm at home, but I'm answering emails, I'm working on a project that I really care about, right? Even within the domains, spending time with our family cleaning up after them is different than spending time talking, playing a game together, really connecting it with full attention. So thinking about just taking stock of where you are right now and starting to look for those gaps between the present and what could be. So, things that you might want to ask yourself as you're doing this is, how has this reality shifted due to coronavirus? How has this reality shifted in 2020? How does your four-way view look differently now than maybe it did 6 months ago or a year ago? What patterns do you see that give you clues about what's working well and what's not? As I said earlier, if it were easy or obvious, you probably would have done it already. So now you have to start to think more like an investigator, trying to find the clues that lead you to new ways of doing things. And then lastly, what's the biggest obstacle that you face besides time in trying to create harmony? And that besides time is particularly important here, because if I didn't put that little caveat in, everybody would just say, not enough time. I don't have enough time. Well, that's maybe true. We certainly only have 24 hours in a day, but it's not that helpful because we can't change it. So what else, what other the obstacles might you be facing that that prevent you from achieving that harmony? And it could be obstacles that are in your own head. It could be, I expect myself to be perfect, or I, am really uncomfortable delegating tasks to other people. It could be obstacles external to you. You may have a special needs child. You may have a work where they're doing layoffs and you need to perform at a certain level in order to keep your job. So, acknowledging that some of this is in our external reality and some of it is the story we tell ourselves about our external reality, and trying to parse those apart is not easy, um, because oftentimes things feel like they're real when we constantly tell ourselves this particular story. So just think about what obstacles those might be. And then, as I mentioned earlier, you can start to have conversations with your children about the values that you have, the vision that you have for a better future, and about their values. And I think people often come to me and say, like, what's too young to start talking about values? And, certainly an infant's not going to get it, but there's really little harm in talking about values or starting to read them stories about, things that you care about as a family. I know that when my kids were little, they're 8 and 10 now, but when they were younger, we had, the three values: kindness, fairness, fun. And the conversations that I had with my, toddlers about fairness were much less sophisticated than the conversations that we're having right now about fairness when we talk about the Black Lives Matter movement, when we talk about protest, when we talk about what's going on in our neighborhood. But the idea of fairness and of talking about fairness as a value that we all cherish is something that's been consistent. So they can start young, and certainly teenagers, older kids can have much more sophisticated understanding of their values, and they want to hear yours, right? They don't, or I wouldn't assume that they know what you care about just because they're viewing your actions, right? Let's say you're ignoring your children because you have to work all day. Well, they may interpret that as you caring about your job more than them or liking your work better than them, but that may not necessarily be the case. If you tell them that the reason you work is because you want to provide financially for the family, or it gives you a sense of independence, or you like to help people, right? That information translates very differently when it's accompanied by the words that you use to speak. For those of you who have older children and want to engage your children in conversations about values, you can Google, do an internet search of list of core values and invite your children to rate what their top 10 are and why. I do this with my college students. They think that they're coming for classes on business and management, and it turns out that I encourage them to talk about what matters most to them and to tell me about their values. And, the reaction is oftentimes I didn't know that I needed to do this work, but I'm glad that I did. And it helps make sense of the the experiences that they're having. If you're having a clash with a child, it's not just a clash about whether they should do the dishes or not. It may be a clash of values, right? Your value of having things clean or organized or done may be butting up against their values of independence, making their own decisions. And it's not necessarily right or wrong, but when you have the conversation framed as differences of values, it becomes a lot less personal and a lot less volatile than conversations about you're like this or I'm like that and you want this, etc. So just think about how you can engage your children in these conversations. And then the next step is to get familiar, get comfortable expanding those conversations out even further. So, how can you talk to your colleagues, your friends, your neighbors, your parents, your extended family, your childcare providers? How do you talk to people about what matters most to you? And how do you communicate that? And I think many of the people that I work with, they assume that the people around them know what they care about. They assume that the people around them aren't helping them or aren't supporting them because they don't want to. But what we often find is that when you talk to people about what you care about, what you need from them, what your expectations are from them, they're really surprisingly willing to step up and support you. They oftentimes just don't know the best way to do it. So, as a leader, it's your job to help people understand how they can be part of your world, be part of your circle. So imagine if you're a CEO of a company, you say, here's our values, here's our vision, that you don't just leave people to go implement it however they see fit. You start talking about strategies, right? How can we work together to live our shared values? How do we support one another? In pandemic times, we're having really interesting conversations, or at least I am, with friends and childcare providers about shared values around health and safety, right? What's your perception of, safe social distancing versus what's mine? And it's not comfortable to be vulnerable in that way when we're not used to doing it. But it's incredibly important. And building that trust and building those relationships, it not only helps you, live your values more fully, it helps you get the support that you need in order to do so. So, and I encourage you to practice that vulnerability of expressing what matters to you and communicating it, and being willing to say, okay, I didn't quite express that in the way I intended. Can I try again? Can we talk about this again later? To really be proactive in initiating those conversations. So then comes the fun part, right? You've created this vision of what could be. You've identified some areas where there's gaps between where you are and what you want, and you've talked to the people around you. The next step is to start finding ways to do things differently. This is a picture of my friend's daughter doing an experiment. I just noticed the corkscrew in the bottom of, so I think, here's to drinking our way through the pandemic, not really. But how could we experiment with new ways of doing things? So we can come up with consciously designed experiments that provide small, doable wins. So when I say experiment, I don't mean that you necessarily have to overhaul your entire life in order to find greater harmony. For the vast majority of people, the changes that they implement are very small, and the results far outweigh the magnitude of the change. Now, every once in a while, we come across people who say, I want to quit my job and take my family and live on a houseboat for a year and travel the world or whatever. And go for it. But know that most of the experiments that I see, and I've read thousands and thousands and thousands of them, um, are much smaller. They're something that takes 15, 20 minutes, an hour. They're a quick new way of doing things. And you want to find experiments that make things better for you in your own life and for the people around you. But the idea is that an experiment shouldn't just be something that makes things better in one part of life, but makes things worse in others. I can think of lots of experiments that would make my work performance better, but they would hurt my family domain. I can think of lots of experiments that would make my family life better, but they might hurt my mental and physical health. So thinking about what small changes that you can make that have the potential at least for wins or improvements across domains. And it might not be immediately obvious. So I think we all know now that, if we take time, for instance, for our mental or physical health, let's say by going for a walk in nature, on the surface, that seems like it's taking away time from work or from family or from all of our other responsibilities. But when we look a little deeper, we might find that doing that actually benefits those domains because we're calmer, our blood pressure's lower, we're getting active, we're feeling more at peace. So just imagine what sort of changes could have potential for positive four-way wins. And then the idea is to try it out to see what happens. And I can tell you, both from personal experience, but also from, again, as I said, collecting data on people's experiments. Ooh, somebody dropped something upstairs for the last, I've been doing this research for 15 years on experiments. I can tell you that experiments fail, and that is perfectly fine. And in fact, it's good because what you want to do here is get better at trying experiments, seeing if they work, and letting go of them if they don't suit you. So rather than thinking of this as like a New Year's resolution, right, of how you're going to be different and how you're finally going to get your act together, thinking of this as just an experiment. It's separate from you, doesn't reflect poorly on you if it doesn't go well. It's just an experiment. So looking at it, trying it out, and then embracing it with curiosity and with compassion for yourself, to say, okay, that was not the hit that I thought it would be, the winner. And I can tell you that when this pandemic thing started, I was understandably feeling really stressed out about all of the different things going on in terms of moving my courses online, moving my kids, out of school, all of those different things. And I came up with the idea for an experiment that we should get a foster dog because it would distract all of us from the stress of the pandemic and allow us to focus on our family values of helping someone in need, working together, having fun, all of those things. So I came up with this great experiment to have a foster puppy, and quickly realized that actually that just added to the stress. I was then waking up in the middle of the night and taking a dog out to go to the bathroom and getting less rest, and the kids were scared of the dog because they were getting nipped at by a puppy. And it was a failed experiment, and fortunately it was a short-lived experiment because the dog was quickly adopted. But be willing to try things, admit if they don't go well, learn, and shift. And now you guys are all seeing a parade of my family in the background. So having worked with parents um, for many years, there's 6 themes that come up when you think about experiments that they try for pursuing these family four-way wins. And this isn't intended to be prescriptive. It's not intended to tell you you have to pick option 1 or option 2. It's just intended to illustrate what different people are doing and hope that that inspires you. So the first experiment that's really common is focusing on generating quality time. So rather than trying to do everything all the time, focus on how can you do certain things with greater presence and focus. So I think a lot of us have this sort of false belief that if we multitask, it will make things okay. Okay, bye, sweetie. It will make things better. that by doing more things at once, we'll be super efficient and we'll meet all of our responsibilities. And what we find is that when people take specific time to focus on being present in one part of their life, they're able to do more with less. So, do your children really need your attention for multiple hours a day while you're distracted, while you're frustrated? In some cases, yes, they may, especially if they're little. But in other cases, an hour of quality time together may be more valuable than many hours of less quality time. Same thing with work. How can you be more efficient and get greater focus in less time? So people do experiments with this, things like we're going to turn off our phone at the dinner table, or each partner takes a 2-hour chunk where they're sort of protected from interruptions. What can you do to generate quality time in your own life? Next theme is letting go. So I mentioned the idea that we have these sort of voices in our head, either from other people or from ourselves, about how we're supposed to be, what we're supposed to do. And a lot of us, well, a lot of the people that I work with, are admittedly perfectionists. And they expect themselves to do everything perfectly in all the different parts of our life. So, looking for how can I experiment with letting go of certain tasks, responsibilities? Can I delegate them to my children? Can I delegate them to my partner? Can I delegate them at work? And certainly don't delegate things that are important that you do yourself, right? Don't do anything that's going to get you fired, but try to think creatively about where your efforts and your work, your energy, and your precious time is most important. And then look at what can I let go with limited repercussions? And can you let them go in ways that make things better, not just for you, but for the people around you? So, certainly, I would love to tell my partner and my kids that I'm letting go of all of the household responsibilities and they can take them. Well, that makes things better in one sense, but it creates added stress in many others. So, what are creative ways to let things go where, the ship doesn't sink, where things stay standing? Another really common type of experiment is coordinating logistics. So, in pre pandemic times, we had a lot of couples try things like getting a shared Google Calendar, setting aside a Sunday nights to plan out the meetings. When pandemic times started, my husband and I, tried to sit down and plan out the week in terms of all of our Zoom meetings and responsibilities and deadlines, and also our kids. And we quickly realized that a week does not work. Right now, if you can see behind me, we have the whiteboard, which coordinates all of our meetings on a daily basis. So, not thinking more than one day ahead right now, and working it day by day to figure out who needs to be where and who does what. And I show you that not to imply that I actually have my act together, but to really show you that I'm trying to figure this stuff out too. I've forgotten meetings. I've, missed things. My kids have forgotten or, missed things. Clearly, they are interrupting occasionally. So, what works in the current moment? What might work? You don't know. It's just a hypothesis. The next one is practicing shared values. I actually made this slide before I came up with the idea to foster a dog. But what can you actively do together to live your shared values? Whether that's, can we sew masks together to donate? Can we go protest peacefully together? Can we play a fun game together, right? Thinking of ways to proactively live your values as a family in ways that work for you. So if you look at your life and you say, I have these values, here's how I spend my time and energy. I have one value that I'm really not getting to express fully. Or as a family, I feel like we're falling a little bit short on that one. Well, can you come up with can you come up with an experiment with your partner, with your kids, with your extended family about how to live those values? So I clearly learned that fostering a pet is not going to be the solution for my family to live our values of helping animals in need and um, having some fun, right? That's not going to be it. So what else could it be, right? What else could we try in order to get that part of our life activated in a way that we all find fulfilling and that makes things better for us, not just I'm living this value, but it's disrupting everything else. I think a lot of us recognize the need to care for our mental and physical health right now. I feel like at least, and maybe this is too personal, but normally I operate with like a bucket of resilience so that, the highs and lows of the day, I can kind of get through the frustrations of, my kids are bickering. Oh, an email didn't get sent, right? All of that. I feel like my well of resistance that I'm constantly bouncing off of is thin. And for better or for worse, when I do take that time to care for my mental and physical health, I can kind of thicken it a little bit so that I'm not quite at the mercy of the events of the day as much. That doesn't mean that I'm immune to the events of the day, certainly. Um, but I have found that it, in particular during this time, it's noticeable that taking time for my health um, benefits me. But how can I do it in a way that works for the other people in my life, whether by going out for walks with my kids or bike rides or doing it after they go to bed or before they wake up? There's lots of creative ways to build health either individually or together. And then don't have a potluck right now. This is an old image, but how can we strengthen the networks, the relationships that support us? So we talked about cultivating those relationships, but that takes time and energy too. So we want to be intelligent and creative about how we go about doing that. So what can we do within the constraints of the current situation to strengthen our relationships and our network with others? And it may not be hosting a potluck. So is it a Zoom meeting or is it, once weekly call? I accidentally stumbled on the best experiment that's really working for me, which is, and we could figure out where the category is this as well. My daughter, one of her school assignments is to read out loud to somebody every day. We got the technology set up so that she can FaceTime my dad, grandpa, and read to him. So it's strengthening that relationship, but it's doing it in a way that doesn't require any extra energy from me. And in fact, takes the burden off of me to pay full attention to her reading. And it also takes the burden off of me to connect with my dad who's alone right now. I mean, I still connect with him, but I feel really good knowing that he's getting extra grandkid time. So, what are creative opportunities like that that could make things better across multiple domains of life? And I'm certainly not saying that I have all the answers. That was a lucky one that we, as I said, stumbled into. So I don't expect you to use this chart. I just wanted to be here to show you what it looks like when we do this for a more in-depth approach when we're working with people over the course of weeks or months. They come up with some ideas for experiments and then they pick a few and they say, okay, what is the goal? How is this going to make things better for my partnership, my children, my career, my partner's career if I have one, my community relationships, etc. And we ask people to say, how will this experiment benefit all these domains? And how will you know? How will you measure it? So it could be measuring things like at the end of the day, you give a little smiley face to frowny face rating for how you felt that day. It could be looking at, your heart rate monitor and seeing, did you get over, did you get your heart rate up to a good, you know, cardiovascular, whatever today? How do you measure whether things are working or not? And then you use that information to say, do I want to keep doing this experiment? Do I want to switch something up? Do I want to bail on it completely? And you do that in a way that's based on the evidence from your own life and from the people around you to know whether it's working for them. Imagine an experiment where you want to work flexible hours. Well, you don't get to just tell your boss, okay, hey, I'm working flexible hours now. Cool, cool. Right? You have to say, I want to try working flexible hours. Here's how I think it will benefit here's how I think it will benefit me. Let's try it out and measure and see whether it works for both of us. And if it doesn't, we will reconvene and discuss how we're going to move forward. That's a lot easier of a sell to get a colleague, a boss on board with you try an experiment versus can I have flex time now forever, right? So think about how measuring and talking with people about the outcomes of your changes can empower you to get their support and get them on your side for making things better. So when you think about this, can you come up with an idea or two or three for an experiment? You probably don't want to try them all at once because then you've got this mishmash, and a scientist would say, you can't isolate the cause of the changes when you're changing so many things. How would this help you find greater harmony right now? Is it a four-way win for multiple people in your family? What support do you need to make it happen? And what's the first step that you can take to start today to try out that experiment? And hopefully, when you think about an experiment, it's not quite so overwhelming to get started because you're not committing forever, right? If your experiment is to get fit, maybe you don't start by buying a $5,000 home gym. Maybe you start by going for a walk, right? And then you can build from there. So, what is the first step that's sort of low cost, both financially, but also in terms of the stakes in your relationships that could make things better? I want to share with you some of the results from when we've gathered this data. I put the caveat up there that this is data collected from parents in pre-pandemic circumstances. So just take that for what you will. But what we find is that we look at the importance that people place on the different domains of their life at the start of our working with them. And you could see career and family are the top priorities, with community and self following afterwards. A few months later, after they've had the opportunity to do all of those different skill development things that I told you about, to try out experiments, we find that really what matters most to them doesn't change very much. And that's not that surprising. And it's probably a good thing that we're not totally upending people's priorities in life. The numbers stay relatively the same, and that's a good thing. What we find, though, is that there's pretty significant changes in where people spend their attention and energy. And what we find is that the focus shifts away from work and is reallocated to the three other domains. Now, that seems like it might be problematic, but what we find, and I'll show you the results for this in a second, is that when people shift their focus away from work in intelligent ways, with the support of their colleagues, the people around them, with greater understanding of what the people around them expect, want, and need from them, they are able to actually make things better at work. So you can reallocate a little bit of time away from work and make things better across multiple parts of life. Now, certainly there are professions where you can't simply work fewer hours. And we're not necessarily saying that you need to work fewer hours, but it might be using the hours that you work more intelligently. Not always possible, and certainly didn't happen for everybody, but it tends to be a theme in the results that we gather. And what you see is increases in satisfaction. This is percentage change in satisfaction across all the different domains, but especially the self domain, and increases in performance. So not only do people feel better, they feel like they're doing better as well. So there tends to be this finding that actually making these changes can make things better across multiple parts of life. So it doesn't necessarily have to be this huge trade off like we imagine it will be, that if I want to make one thing better, everything else has to get worse. The reality is it's possible to improve more than one thing at once. And that's really the goal here. So constantly, as you try and enact these ideas, looking and saying, how is this impacting all of the parts of my life? Not necessarily saying, okay, well, I'm willing to sacrifice my sleep in order to get this, or I'm willing to sacrifice my relationship with my partner in order to get that. There are ways it's possible to make things better across all domains, but it's not easy or obvious. And it's especially not easy or obvious right now when many of us have fewer choices, less control, there's less predictability than ever. So I understand that these results may not exactly replicate in a pandemic, but uh, hopefully there can be some improvements at least. And I know from the work that I've been doing over the last few months and the people that I've been talking to, simply feeling like they can make small changes means a lot. Feeling like we're not just stuck with whatever hand we're dealt. Um, it may not be drastic upheaval, but we can feel better and do better. And in their work with us, we tend to see some common themes about the lessons people learn and the insights that they take away from the experience and what it means to them when they start using this leadership approach to work life balance, as opposed to the more traditional, I'm going to trade things off to get more of one, I have to have less of the other. They start to realize that they have more love and support than they knew. I mentioned this earlier, but people assume that the people around them don't have the time, energy, or motivation or willingness to help, and we don't want to ask them. But when we start to be more vulnerable, the support, the love, the encouragement, it appears naturally that the people actually do want to help us achieve our goals and live our values. We learn that people can really deepen their connections with their partner and children and the people around them in ways that they didn't necessarily think was possible. So you would think, so I've been with my husband, we met when I was 18. I, in my head, imagine, well, we can't get to know each other better, right? We know each other. I know everything he's going to say and do. Well, this process reveals deeper connections and it reveals greater opportunities for understanding. And that the people around us, even the people who are closest to us, don't always want and need the things that we think they do from us. And that we're not always communicating our wants and needs as accurately as we think we are either. People report that they learn to set more realistic expectations for themselves and for others. I said people don't always want and need what we think that they do. We often have unrealistic expectations of ourselves. We think that people expect us to be perfect, and they don't necessarily, or we expect other people to be perfect, and we don't communicate that we accept them the way they are. So this reality checking of looking at what we think we're communicating, what we think we're hearing versus the reality is incredibly important. People start to realize that even within the constraints that we're facing right now, we are limited in where we can go and what we can do and how we can move. But even within those constraints, there's more freedom to make changes than we often realize or often think. And for those of us who do have that freedom, it's a real privilege and we should be using it. That small changes um, can really have a big impact, that you don't have to upend your whole life in order to make things better. And finally, people start to see themselves as the leaders that they are capable of being, that we're not just stuck being reactive to the negativity, to the frustration of the current situation, that we can be proactive and do our best within the constraints of the situation, accepting the situation as it is, to lead ourselves and others and to live our values and to help others do the same. So I want to say thank you so much for letting me say all of that stuff, but also open it up to questions now. Milika, can you share some questions with me?
Certainly. Thank you so much, Alyssa. This was really great information. I know with things changing daily for everybody, the idea of experimenting and not engineering the solutions and hoping for them to be perfect solutions, that is so, so valuable. Gonna give us that idea. I really appreciate it. Yeah, we have wonderful
Thanks.
questions that came in. And please, I would like to let others know, viewers, to submit their questions. We'll get to them as we can with the time we have till till 2 o'clock. So please, this question is really good. It came in. What advice do you have for parents working to define core values for their family when there seems to be a disagreement on what those should be? And
Hmm.
then a follow-up to that is it more important to have common ground for each parent to be true to their personal values? So a two-part
So,
question.
yeah, so I love that question. And I know that off the bat, a lot of the couples that we work with, when we had them each write out their values and compare the lists, and so they were like, "Oh my God, our lists are totally different. What does this mean? Why aren't they the same?" And I think that having some shared values and being able to find those and uncover them is important, but also recognizing that a strong partnership allows each person to express their individual values, and that's a good thing, that my partner and I can care about different things and therefore serve our children, serve our community, serve our careers in different ways. So I wouldn't get too hung up on feeling bad if your lists don't overlap perfectly, and instead focus on, okay, what are the commonalities? What do we agree on, and how can we make room for everybody in our family to have an opportunity to live their values?
Hmm. Yeah, thank you. That was very helpful. Um, there's a question. If you could go back to the concept of resistance, what is the bucket of resistance? And would you mind explaining a bit
Oh,
more
yeah,
about it?
and that's
Thank you.
that's my own sort of uh language, and the way I've been thinking about it is I've been thinking of myself as like under normal circumstances, I have sort of this cushion that I can bounce on of resilience. So, like, my kid annoys me, and I can draw on patience. And I know that tomorrow I'll get to go into the office and have quiet time to work. And there's just sort of this sense of being able to bounce back from minor frustrations. And the other day, my dishwasher broke, and it felt really dramatic, right? Probably in part because I'm doing a lot more dishes than I ever have before. But I feel like part of this pandemic and constantly being together, working, living in this community is we don't have necessarily have that same time to rejuvenate ourselves, to build back up our resilience in order to deal with the frustrations of everyday life. So my metaphor is like my cushion, my padding that I can bounce back from. But if that metaphor doesn't work for you, it's just this idea that um, how do you not make small things feel really big? And how do you give yourself some freedom so that you can actually see things not as the tragedies that they are when they're not? There certainly are enough tragedies, real ones to focus on. So, how can you kind of create your resilience to deal with the minor stuff?
Okay. Um, Thank you. Yeah, that's a great answer. Thank you for that. There's a question here, and I wonder if other people have also similar thoughts that have to do specifically with age, because children grow and they change so fast. So,
Mhm.
do you have a few specific suggestions, of course, of sources of core values that would be in use with a family that have an 11-year-old child, 11-year-old child?
Yeah. So I have a 10-year-old, almost 11-year-old, and in my experience, the question, what do we care about as a family? My children are able to come up with words, right? And we can hone them in. We can say, well, what do you mean by that? What does that mean? Why do you care about that? um, what else, right? And we can kind of use the word. So, they know. And I think a lot of our kids are actually fairly used to sort of learning about values in school, maybe more so than we were. At least my children talk a lot about social justice, environmental justice, climate change, that sort of thing. So they have some language to talk to. The other thing I do is, depending on the age of the child, I will Google, as I said, list of core values, and you can find a list that's 20 values long, 30, up to hundreds and hundreds of values. And an older child can have a more sophisticated reasoning between why they might pick a specific word to represent their values. But the idea is the same. And the littler the kid, the fewer choices you might want to give them.
Thank you. And I think we have time for one question. This one is a little bit of a difference, so I'm going to choose this one. If you know you need support or mentorship from someone 2 levels up in your company, so it has to do with work,
Mhm.
how would you initiate asking for help?
Um, so I think that one mistake that people make when they're looking for support, whether it's sponsorship or mentoring, is they go and they ask people that they're not necessarily that close with, will you be my mentor? Will you be my sponsor? And that's a really big ask because it's so broad. So I think rather than starting with that, saying, you know, a brief email, here's something I admire about your career or something I aspire to, right? Here's something you have that I want. Don't say, you don't have to say it in that language, but can we chat about it over coffee? Can I take you out for coffee and chat for half an hour? Or can we now have a 15 or 20-minute Zoom meeting? And ask for little things to start, because it's a lot easier for a mentor, a potential mentor, to say yes to a smaller request than to say yes to basically a person that they don't necessarily know that well, for I will be your mentor forever and for all eternity, right? That's a hard ask. So how can you be more focused with that request, and then use it as an opportunity to start articulating what you're looking for and letting them know about you and what you care about.
Yeah. Thank you. And I know situation is different with telecommuting and teleworking and remote, so this is very
Absolutely.
timely to have these conversations. Well, we are at the top of the hour. So this is the last question that we have. Thank you to everyone who has submitted your questions. I want to thank you so much, Alyssa, for joining us today. A lot of good insights. I know we walk away with tools and ideas how to approach parenting challenges going forward. So again, thank you so much. And for our viewers, the recording will be available tomorrow. And if you're listening, feel free to look at upcoming webinars or then check out some of our past events as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you.